That day started like any other, a calm morning, a quiet street. But in just seconds, everything changed. I looked out my window and froze. 3 HOA cops were standing in my yard, rifles raised, and one of them had an AR-15 pointed right at my daughter. Neighbors gasped, people whispered, but no one dared move. They didn't know the truth about her. And when she finally spoke, the entire neighborhood realized this was no ordinary standoff. Welcome back to HOA Max Stories, where the truth about neighborhood drama comes to life. My name's Richard. I've lived in this quiet suburban community for over 20 years. I work a regular job, mow my lawn on Saturdays, and I thought I'd seen it all, until this day. Before I take you deep into this story, I'd like to ask you something. If you enjoy hearing these wild HOA tales, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Think of it as joining our little neighborhood meeting right here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love hearing from folks across America, especially those of you who've dealt with HOAs yourself. Now, let me take you back to the morning when everything went out of control. That morning was bright, the kind of morning where you expect peace, not chaos. The birds were chirping, the sun was warm on the street, and I was halfway through my first cup of coffee. Everything looked normal, but then I heard shouting. At first, I thought maybe kids were playing rough outside. But the voices were too harsh, too commanding. I set my coffee down and stepped onto the porch. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. 3 HOA cops standing on my lawn. Their uniforms weren't real police uniforms, but they sure looked official enough to fool anyone. Bulletproof vests, radios on their shoulders, and weapons strapped tight. And the leader, he had an AR-15 aimed straight at my daughter's chest. I froze. My daughter, she wasn't dressed like an FBI agent. No, to them she looked like any other neighbor. She was standing tall though, calm in a way that made me nervous. She had her sidearm drawn, steady in her hands. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't afraid. The HOA cops barked orders. Drop your weapon. Put it down now. But she didn't move. Her eyes. I've seen those eyes before. Sharp, steady, like she could see right through danger. She stayed locked on the man with the AR-15. I whispered her name, but she didn't even turn. The neighbors started gathering. Curtains moved, doors opened, people stepped onto their porches. One by one, everyone came out. They wanted to see what the HOA was doing this time. Most of us were tired of their games. But this was no game. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The AR-15 glinted in the sunlight. The barrel looked enormous, and it was pointed right at her. I wanted to run, to yell, to throw myself between them, but my legs wouldn't move. I felt glued to the porch. I could only watch. The leader shouted again. Drop your weapon now, or we will fire. Still, my daughter stayed calm. She lowered her voice, steady and firm, and finally spoke. I am FBI Tactical Commander. Put your gun down. The whole street gasped. People whispered. A woman down the block covered her mouth with her hands. The HOA cops blinked, confused for a second. One of them shifted nervously. But the man with the AR-15, he didn't lower his gun. His finger was on the trigger. I could see sweat rolling down his temple. His jaw was tight, teeth clenched. He thought he had control, but he had no idea how wrong he was. My daughter's voice grew sharper. You are pointing a rifle at a federal officer. You need to think very carefully about your next move. For a second, silence. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. The tension was unbearable. Every second felt like a minute. I prayed nothing would go wrong, because if he pulled that trigger. I remembered when she first told me about her job. She had said, Dad, sometimes I can't tell you everything. But know this. I'm trained to handle whatever comes my way. At the time, I thought it was just reassurance. But now, watching her stare down an AR-15 without blinking, I realized she had meant every word. The neighbors stood frozen, some holding their phones, recording. Others just stared, wide-eyed. Everyone was waiting for the next move. And then, the sound of sirens. Faint at first, then louder. Red and blue lights flickered at the end of the street. Real police. The HOA cops stiffened. One of them stepped back. But the leader, the one with the AR-15, he didn't budge. He yelled again, trying to sound in control. "You're bluffing. No way you're FBI." But my daughter didn't even blink. She kept her pistol steady, her voice low. "Test me." Those two words cut through the air like a knife. The crowd gasped again. I felt my throat go dry. The real police cars screeched to a halt. Doors flew open. Officers rushed out, shouting commands. "Put your weapons down. Now." The HOA cops froze in place. They looked at each other, unsure, scared. The man with the AR-15 finally glanced around, realized he was surrounded, but still, his weapon was pointed at her. I couldn't breathe. Would he lower it? Would he fire out of panic? My daughter didn't move an inch. Calm. Steady. Her finger was right where it needed to be. The real police spread out, aiming at the HOA. The tension was unbearable. Neighbors ducked behind cars, peeking over hoods. Mothers pulled children back into houses. The entire street became a battlefield of silence and fear. The HOA cops' radios crackled. I don't know what they heard, but one by one, their guns lowered. Except for the leader. His rifle still aimed at her chest. The real officers shouted again. "Drop it! Drop it now!" But he shook his head. "She's lying. She's not FBI." My daughter finally took one slow step forward. Her voice was cold now. "Firm. I told you once. I'm FBI Tactical Commander. And this is your last chance." I felt my knees weaken. I gripped the porch railing to keep from falling. The leader's hand trembled on the rifle. His eyes darted, wild, desperate. And then, he did something that made every single person on that street gasp. And right here, before I tell you what he did, I want to ask you something. If you were standing on that street, watching an HOA cop point an AR-15 at your family, what would you do? Would you run, would you scream, or would you stand your ground like my daughter did? Tell me in the comments below. I really want to know what you would have done. The air was heavy, so heavy that even breathing felt like a crime. Every eye on the street was locked on that single moment, the AR-15 aimed at my daughter's chest, his finger trembling on the trigger. And then, he smirked. Not the kind of smirk you see when someone wins, but the kind of smirk you see when a man thinks he has nothing to lose. He shouted, his voice breaking with anger. "You're bluffing. You think a badge scares me?" The crowd gasped again. Mothers covered their children's ears. I felt my stomach twist into knots. I wanted to scream at him, to beg him to stop, but my voice wouldn't come out. My daughter's face didn't change. Calm. Unshaken. She spoke, clear and sharp. "Last warning. Drop it. Now." The real police shouted too, their guns all trained on him. But still, he held on. His eyes darted from her pistol, to the flashing lights, to the neighbors frozen in shock. He was cornered, and cornered men are dangerous. My daughter didn't flinch. She took another slow step forward, her pistol still steady, her voice strong. "You're not in control anymore. Put it down, or I will take you down." The silence stretched like a tight rope ready to snap. The man's knuckles turned white around the AR-15. I could see him wrestling with himself, pride fighting fear, anger fighting logic. And then, he screamed and yanked the rifle higher, aiming directly at her head. The crowd shrieked. People ducked behind cars. Someone shouted, "He's gonna do it." But before he could even move his finger on the trigger, my daughter's voice cut through the chaos. "Don't even try." Her pistol didn't shake. Her aim was exact. And in that split second, something in his face changed. Maybe it was fear, maybe realization, maybe both. His chest heaved. Sweat poured down his face. And then, finally, his arms dropped. The AR-15 lowered toward the ground. The real police rushed forward, shouting commands. "Drop it! On the ground now!" He hesitated, one last flash of defiance in his eyes, and then he let the rifle clatter onto the pavement. The sound echoed through the street like thunder. The other HOA cops followed quickly, dropping their weapons, raising their hands. The standoff was ending, but the tension in the air was still sharp enough to cut through bone. The officers swarmed them, pinning them against cars, shouting rights, snapping handcuffs. The neighbors watched in stunned silence. Some recorded, others just shook their heads. And my daughter, she finally lowered her pistol, sliding it back into its holster. She didn't gloat. She didn't shout. She just turned and looked at me. Our eyes met, and in that moment I saw it, the steel in her. She had been ready to risk it all. The street was buzzing now. People whispering, asking each other what just happened. A woman clutched her husband's arm and said, "She's FBI, my God, she's really FBI." The leader of the HOA cops was shoved into the back of a cruiser, still cursing, still shouting that she was lying. But no one believed him anymore. The truth had been written all over her stance, her calm, her control. One of the real officers approached her. He nodded with respect. "Ma'am, you handled that perfectly." She gave a short reply. "I did my job." But to me, it was more than that. She wasn't just doing her job. She was protecting her family, our home, and showing this neighborhood what real authority looked like. The HOA members had always acted like kings of the block, sending letters, patrolling like they were military. But tonight, they were exposed for what they really were. Pretenders with badges. I stood there on the porch, still frozen, still trying to process it. My coffee mug sat untouched, the steam long gone. My knees felt weak, but I couldn't move. The neighbors slowly came closer, some clapping her on the back, others thanking her, their voices shaky with relief. One old man shook his head and muttered, "I always knew this HOA would push too far, but never thought it would come to this." And through all of it, my daughter remained calm. Like it was just another day at work. But for me, it was the longest day of my life. I couldn't shake the image of that rifle pointed at her head. I couldn't forget the sound of his voice screaming at her. That smirk when he thought he had control. I kept replaying it in my mind. What if she hadn't stayed calm? What if the real police had been 1 minute late? What if his finger had slipped? I shuddered just thinking about it. Later that evening, when the street finally cleared, and the flashing lights were gone, I sat on the porch with her. The air was quiet again, but I couldn't relax. She looked at me and said softly, "Dad, this is what I'm trained for." "But I know it scared you." Scared me? It nearly broke me. I wanted to ask her so many things, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, I just nodded. She knew what I meant. The neighbors would talk about this for years. The HOA would never have the same power again. But me? I'd never forget how close I came to losing her right in front of my eyes. And that's when the thought hit me. What would have happened if the police hadn't arrived in time? What if it had been just her, and 3 armed men who thought they were untouchable? Would she still have walked away the same way she did that day? So let me ask you this, if you were standing there, watching everything unfold, would you trust your HOA to ever keep you safe again? Or would you fight back and demand change? Tell me down in the comments. I'm curious if you'd let the HOA stay in power, or if you'd want them gone for good. That night I couldn't sleep, no matter how hard I tried. The flashing red and blue lights still danced in my head, the sound of that rifle hitting the pavement still echoed in my ears. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, the barrel pointed at my daughter, his smirk, her calm stare back at him. The neighborhood was quiet now, but it didn't feel the same. not after what happened. I sat by the window, watching the empty street. The shadows of the trees swayed in the moonlight, and the air felt heavier than usual. My daughter was resting in her room, calm as ever. I envied her calmness. But me, my mind wouldn't stop racing. And then, the phone rang. I jumped. My heart skipped a beat. Who would be calling at this hour? I picked up the receiver with a shaky hand. It was a neighbor. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Richard, you need to know something. This wasn't just a random patrol. The HOA board, they ordered this." My throat went dry. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "They wanted to scare you. They wanted to make an example, but they didn't know who your daughter really was. And now, they're panicking." I froze. So it wasn't just a power-hungry cop. This went deeper. The entire HOA board had approved this madness. When I hung up the phone, I stared out the window again. A part of me wanted to storm into the next board meeting and call them out. But another part of me, the cautious part, knew this wasn't over. People who act like kings don't just back down overnight. They plot. They retaliate. The next morning, I walked outside to grab the paper. And there it was. A letter taped to my door. The HOA's logo printed bold at the top. My hands trembled as I opened it. It read, "You've embarrassed this community. You've brought shame onto your neighbors. We will not tolerate this behavior. The HOA will respond." Respond? What did that mean? Were they threatening me? Or worse, my daughter? I looked up and down the street. Some neighbors waved weakly, others looked away. Fear was already spreading. The board was using intimidation the way they always had. But this time, they had crossed the line. Later that day, my daughter sat with me on the porch. She read the letter quietly, then folded it. "They're scared, Dad. They know they've been exposed. That's why they're lashing out." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the worry. What if they try something again? She looked me dead in the eye. "Let them try." There was something chilling in her tone. Not anger, not arrogance, but certainty. Like she had already played this game before and knew how it ended. That week, the HOA held an emergency meeting. The community center was packed. People whispered nervously, glancing at my daughter and me as we walked in. The board members sat at the front table, stiff in their seats, papers stacked neatly in front of them like shields. The president cleared his throat. "We're here to address the incident." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One man shouted from the back, "Incident? You aimed rifles at our neighbor's daughter." The board tried to calm the room, but the anger was spreading. My daughter sat still beside me, arms crossed, watching. The president continued. "We acted in the best interest of the community. Safety and order are our priority." I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up. My voice shook but grew louder with every word. "Best interest? You called armed men to my yard. You pointed an AR-15 at my daughter's head. That's not safety, that's insanity." The room erupted. Neighbors shouted, some siding with me, others still afraid of the board. And then, my daughter stood. She didn't need to shout. Her voice carried like steel. "I am an FBI tactical commander. What your so-called HOA police did was illegal. Reckless. Dangerous. If I hadn't been trained, someone would be dead right now." Gasps filled the room. The board members stiffened, their faces pale. She took a step forward. "This isn't about rules, or grass length, or mailbox colors. This is about power. And you abused it. The question is, will this community let you?" The silence was deafening. People looked at each other, unsure, torn between fear and fury. Finally, an elderly neighbor stood. His voice cracked with emotion. We've lived here 30 years, and never once have we felt safe around this HOA. Enough is enough. Applause broke out. One by one, neighbors stood, clapping, shouting, demanding answers. The board tried to silence them, but the dam had broken. For the first time, the HOA wasn't feared. It was cornered. That night, as we walked home, my daughter said softly, "This isn't over yet. They'll try to fight back. They won't give up power so easily." I believed her. Because I could still see the rage in the president's eyes, the way he glared at us as the meeting fell apart. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of a war inside our own neighborhood. And as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I kept asking myself, if a simple HOA could arm itself with rifles and threaten families, how far would they go to keep their control? So let me ask you this, if your HOA turned into a private army, pointing guns instead of sending letters, would you stay and fight to take them down, or would you pack up and leave your home behind? Tell me in the comments, because I really want to know how you would handle it. The days after that meeting felt strange, almost like walking through a storm that hadn't hit yet. The air was heavy, neighbors spoke in whispers, and every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. The board had lost control in front of the whole community, but people like them don't just disappear. They plot in the shadows. One evening, as I was locking up the house, I noticed a car parked across the street. The headlights were off, but I could see the faint glow of a cigarette inside. The same car showed up the next night, and the night after that. They were watching us. I told my daughter. She didn't seem surprised. She just nodded. They're trying to intimidate us. Let them watch. They'll slip up soon enough. Her calmness unsettled me. How could she be so steady when I felt like I was living inside a ticking time bomb? 2 days later, I got another letter from the HOA. This one wasn't taped to my door, it was shoved into my mailbox, no stamp, no envelope. Just a single sheet of paper with 4 words written in bold black marker. "You will regret this." My blood ran cold. I showed it to my daughter. She read it once, folded it neatly, and set it on the table. "They're desperate now," she said. "That makes them sloppy. Sloppy is good. Sloppy gets them caught." But I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. Regret this? What did that mean? The next morning, our front yard sprinkler system was smashed. The day after that, someone spray-painted traitors across our driveway. Every day, a new message, a new warning. The neighbors pretended not to see, but I could feel their sympathy, their fear. Some offered kind words in hushed tones, others left groceries at our porch as if we were grieving. But none dared to speak up publicly. The HOA had scared them for too long. One night, I woke to a noise outside. My daughter was already awake, standing by the window with her pistol in hand. She motioned for me to stay quiet. We watched in silence as 2 figures crept through our yard. Dark hoodies, gloves, moving quick. They were trying to pry open the garage door. My daughter whispered, "Stay here." Before I could argue, she slipped out the back door like a shadow. I held my breath, peeking through the blinds. In less than a minute, I heard shouting. "Hands up! Don't move!" The figures froze. A flashlight beam cut through the dark. My daughter's voice was sharp, commanding. "You're trespassing. You're under arrest." I couldn't believe it. She moved with such precision, such authority. The men tried to run, but real police sirens wailed in the distance. She had already called them in. The officers arrived fast, pulling the men to the ground. When the hoods came off, my stomach twisted. They weren't strangers. They were 2 members of the HOA board. The officers cuffed them, shoving them into the back of a cruiser. One of them shouted, "You can't do this. We run this neighborhood." But the neighbors had gathered by then. And for the first time, no one defended them. The board was unraveling. Piece by piece, their empire of fear was crumbling. Still, the president of the HOA remained untouched. He hadn't shown his face since the meeting. And that worried me more than anything. Because men like him, they don't just give up. They wait. They strike when you least expect it. The next morning, as I sat on the porch, a neighbor walked over. An older woman, her voice soft. She leaned close and whispered, "Be careful. He's planning something bigger. Much bigger." I swallowed hard. "How do you know?" She glanced around nervously. "Because he came to me last night. He's recruiting people. Promising them power. Promising them they'll take the neighborhood back. He said you and your daughter are the enemy." The enemy. Those words sank deep into me. That evening, I told my daughter. She didn't flinch. She just loaded her pistol, checked it carefully, and said, "Then let him come." But me? I wasn't ready. I was just a man, a father. She might have been trained for war, but I wasn't. Still, I knew one thing: this wasn't just about my family anymore. The entire neighborhood was watching. Waiting to see if the HOA could still control them, or if they could finally live free. That night, as I tried to sleep, a question burned in my mind. How far would the president go to keep his throne, and how much destruction would he leave in his path? So tell me this: if your HOA leader turned into a dictator, recruiting people and building his own private army, would you stand up and fight for your street, or would you let fear drive you out of your own home? I need to know what you would do. Share it in the comments. The warning signs were everywhere, but nothing prepared me for the night he finally made his move. It started quietly, too quietly. The air was still, the street unusually empty. No kids playing, no neighbors chatting on their porches. It felt like the calm before a storm. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at that crumpled HOA letter that said, "You will regret this." My daughter was cleaning her gear, calm as ever. She didn't say much, just glanced at me every now and then like she already knew something was about to happen. And then, the power went out. The whole house went black. I froze. The hum of the fridge stopped, the clock on the wall went dark, even the streetlights outside blinked off. For a moment, silence. Then came the sound. Boots. Heavy boots. Marching in rhythm. Coming closer. I rushed to the window. A group of men moved down the street, flashlights bouncing in the dark. At least a dozen of them. Some carried bats, others carried rifles. My heart dropped when I saw who was leading them. The HOA president. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was marching right up to my home with his army of loyalists behind him. My daughter stood, calm, pistol already holstered at her side. She whispered, "Stay low. Don't move until I say." But how could I stay calm? They were coming straight for us. The first rock shattered our front window. Glass exploded across the living room floor. Shouts filled the air. "Come out. Face us." Another rock hit the door. Someone swung a bat at the mailbox. The sound of metal bending echoed in the night. I ducked behind the couch, heart pounding so loud I thought they could hear it. The president's voice roared above the chaos. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed the board. Now this whole neighborhood will see who's in charge." My daughter didn't flinch. She moved to the window, crouched low, scanning the shadows. Her voice was calm, steady, like she'd rehearsed this 1,000 times. "Dad, listen to me. They're trying to scare us. But they don't realize they've already lost control." The mob grew louder. Some neighbors peeked from their houses, others shut their blinds tight. No one dared to come out. The HOA's grip of fear was still strong, and now it had turned violent. The president shouted again. "Hand her over. She's no FBI. She's a fraud. Bring her out now or we'll drag her out ourselves." I clenched my fists, rage bubbling in my chest. But my daughter stayed calm. She leaned toward me and whispered, "Stay down." And then she stood tall, right in the broken frame of the window. The crowd roared when they saw her. Some raised their weapons higher, flashlights shining on her face. But she didn't flinch. Her voice cut through the night like thunder. "I am FBI Tactical Commander. This is your last warning. Disperse, now." For a moment, the mob hesitated. Some shuffled back, doubt creeping in. But the president laughed. A cruel, mocking laugh. "FBI? You're nothing here. This is my neighborhood. My rules." He raised his hand, and two men with rifles stepped forward, aiming at the house. My blood turned to ice. But before they could fire, red and blue lights exploded at the end of the street. Sirens screamed, cutting through the night. Dozens of real police cars screeched to a halt. Officers poured out, armed, shouting commands. "Drop your weapons. Hands where we can see them." The HOA mob panicked. Some dropped their bats and ran. Others froze in shock. But the president, he stood his ground, screaming like a madman. "They don't control us. This is our neighborhood." He lifted a rifle from one of his men and aimed it toward the police. I couldn't breathe. My daughter's hand was already on her pistol. Her stance perfect, her eyes locked on him. Time slowed. I thought I was about to watch a nightmare unfold. The president's finger twitched on the trigger. And then, a shot rang out. But it wasn't his. The police fired first, a single round hitting the ground at his feet. He stumbled back, stunned, dropping the rifle. Officers rushed forward, tackling him to the pavement. The mob scattered in every direction, tripping over each other, running into the dark. The street was chaos. Shouts, sirens, neighbors gasping from their porches. The HOA's army was gone. The president screamed as they dragged him into cuffs. "This isn't over. You hear me? This is my neighborhood." But his voice was drowned out by the sirens. My daughter finally lowered her pistol, her face calm but serious. She turned to me and said quietly, "It's over, for now." I stepped out onto the porch, my legs still trembling. The neighbors were gathering again, whispering, pointing, shaking their heads in disbelief. For the first time, the fear in their eyes wasn't directed at us. It was directed at the HOA. The board had fallen apart. Their leader was in handcuffs. Their power was crumbling. But as I looked at my daughter, standing tall in the flashing lights, I couldn't help but wonder. How many people like him are out there? How many HOAs across this country hold neighborhoods hostage with fear and control? So let me ask you, if your HOA president showed up at your house in the middle of the night with an army of neighbors, would you open the door and give in, or would you stand tall and fight back like my daughter did? Drop your answer in the comments, because I need to know how you would face them. The night the president was arrested, our street felt like a battlefield finally gone quiet, but I knew deep down, the war wasn't over. The flashing police lights faded, the mob scattered, but the scars were still there. Broken windows, smashed mailboxes, spray paint dripping on fences. Our neighborhood didn't look like the calm little suburb it once was. It looked like a place that had been held hostage by fear. And the worst part? Some of that fear still lingered. The next morning, I walked out onto the porch. Neighbors were sweeping glass off driveways, picking up trash left behind by the mob. Some nodded at me, others whispered among themselves. A few came up, thanking my daughter, thanking me. But I could see it in their eyes, they weren't sure if it was really over. I wasn't sure either. Later that day, my daughter sat with me at the kitchen table. She was calm, as always. "Dad," she said, "when people like him lose power, they try to take as many down with them as they can. We can't let our guard down yet." I nodded, but the truth was, I was exhausted. I wanted it to be over. I wanted our lives back. But then, the news broke. The local paper ran the headline, "HOA President Arrested After Armed Mob Incident." The story spread fast. Neighbors printed copies, waved them around. Some celebrated. Others worried it would only bring more attention, more trouble. That evening, the board called an emergency meeting. Everyone showed up. The community center was packed wall to wall, tension thick in the air. People weren't whispering anymore, they were shouting. One man stood up, his voice shaking with anger. "We trusted you. You let this man run us like a dictator." A woman shouted from the back, "We were too scared to speak up, and look what happened." The remaining board members sat pale-faced, shuffling papers they couldn't defend. They tried to calm the room, but no one was listening. And then, a neighbor I'd never seen speak before raised his voice. "Enough is enough. We don't need an HOA to tell us how to live. We need freedom." The room erupted in cheers. People clapped, some even stood on chairs, shouting in agreement. For the first time, the power was shifting. I looked at my daughter. She gave me the smallest nod, like she had known all along this moment would come. The board tried one last time to hold control. "Without us, this neighborhood will fall apart. Who will enforce order? Who will protect property values?" But their words sounded weak. Nobody believed them anymore. Not after what we had seen. My daughter stood slowly, her presence alone silencing the room. "You call it order," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "But what you built was fear. Real communities don't need fear to stay strong. They need trust. They need respect. And right now, this neighborhood has neither." The crowd murmured in agreement. Heads nodded. Even those who had once defended the HOA fell silent. The tension was thick, and for a moment, it felt like the whole room was waiting for someone to say what came next. And then, the old man who lived 2 houses down raised his cane and said, "It's time we voted them out." Cheers erupted again. People chanted, "Vote them out. Vote them out." The board members looked pale, trapped, cornered by the very people they once controlled. The vote happened right there, in the heat of the moment. Paper ballots passed from hand to hand, people scribbling furiously. When the box was opened and the papers counted, the result was clear. The HOA board was finished. The room exploded with applause, neighbors hugging, cheering, some even crying. It felt like a weight had been lifted off the entire community. For years, we had lived under rules and threats, under letters and fines, under fear of men who pretended to be police. And now, it was over. At least, that's what we thought. Because as the crowd celebrated, a man in the back shouted over the noise. "What about the president? He's not gone yet. You think he'll sit in jail quietly?" The room fell silent again. The truth hit us all at once. The board was gone, but the president, he still had followers. He still had rage burning in him. And men like that don't fade into the dark without a fight. That night, as my daughter and I walked home, she spoke quietly. "They may have cut off the head, but the body is still alive. And it's dangerous." I swallowed hard. She was right. The fight wasn't finished. It was just changing shape. The neighborhood was celebrating, but I couldn't shake the image of his face as they dragged him into cuffs. The way he screamed, the way his eyes burned with hatred. I knew he was still out there, waiting. And I couldn't stop asking myself. If he came back, would the neighbors who finally found their courage stand with us again? Or would fear pull them back into silence? So let me ask you, if the leader of a corrupt HOA was taken down, but you knew he still had allies in the shadows, would you celebrate the victory, or would you stay on guard, waiting for the storm to return? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know which side of that line you would stand on. The days after the board was voted out felt lighter, like a storm had finally passed. Neighbors smiled more, kids played in the street again, and for the first time in years, people weren't afraid of letters in their mailboxes. But I couldn't relax. Because every night, when I closed my eyes, I saw his face. The HOA president. The way he screamed as the police dragged him away. The way his eyes locked on me, burning with hate. And then it happened. One evening, just as the sun dipped low and painted the street in orange light, I heard a knock at the door. Not the polite kind. A hard, pounding knock that rattled the frame. My stomach dropped. I opened the door slowly, and there he was. The president. Out of jail. Standing on my porch like nothing had happened. His hair was messy, his face pale, but his eyes still burned with the same fire. Behind him, two men lingered in the shadows. I recognized them. Neighbors who had once cheered for him, who now stood with nervous eyes, like they weren't sure if they'd made the right choice. My daughter stepped up beside me. Calm as always, hand resting near her holster. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. He smiled a crooked, bitter smile. Thought you won, didn't you? Thought you killed my HOA? But you don't kill a man like me. You don't erase me. I clenched my fists. Go home. You're finished. The neighborhood doesn't want you anymore. He laughed, loud and sharp. The neighborhood? The neighborhood is weak. They need someone to lead them, to keep them in line. And you destroyed everything. His voice grew louder, spitting with rage. I lost my power, my respect, everything, because of you. And I'm not leaving until I take something back. The shadows behind him shifted. One of his men pulled out a bat. The other pulled a knife. My chest tightened. This wasn't just a visit. This was revenge. My daughter's voice was steady. Leave now. Or you'll regret it. The president sneered. You don't scare me, agent. You're just one woman. This is my street. The moment stretched, thick with tension. Then he stepped closer. 1 foot on my porch, then another. My heart pounded in my ears. My daughter moved like lightning. She stepped forward, blocking me, her stance solid. Her voice cracked through the air. Take one more step, and it's over. For a second, his smirk faltered. But his pride wouldn't let him stop. He lunged. What happened next felt like slow motion. My daughter's hand moved faster than my eyes could follow. Her pistol was out, aimed straight at him. Her voice boomed. Freeze! The neighbors came running out of their houses, drawn by the shouting. Porch lights flicked on, doors opened. Suddenly the whole street was watching again. The president froze, chest heaving, face twisted with rage. His men shifted nervously, eyes darting between her pistol and the growing crowd. And then, sirens again. The real police tore around the corner, lights flashing, tires screeching. They jumped out, guns drawn, shouting commands. On the ground. Now. The president's face went red, veins bulging in his neck. For a moment, I thought he would try something reckless. But then, the fight drained out of him. His shoulders slumped. His men dropped their weapons, stepping back with shaking hands. The officers rushed in, pinning him down, cuffing him tight. He screamed, spit flying, words dripping with hate. This isn't over. I'll never be finished with you. But this time, it felt different. This time, he wasn't just being dragged away. He was being erased. The neighbors cheered as the cruiser doors slammed shut. The kids clapped, adults shouted, some even cried with relief. And me? For the first time in months, I felt the weight finally lift. As the police drove away, my daughter holstered her pistol, turned to me, and said, "It's over, Dad." Truly over. I believed her. The next day, the neighborhood gathered on our street. No board, no president, no fear. Just neighbors, finally free. People shared food, kids rode bikes, laughter filled the air again. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like a community. I sat on my porch, watching the sunset, listening to the sound of life returning. My daughter sat beside me, calm, a small smile tugging at her lips. We didn't need an HOA anymore. We didn't need threats or fake police. We only needed each other. And as I looked at the people around me, I thought about how close we had come to losing it all. One man's thirst for power had nearly destroyed an entire neighborhood. But in the end, he lost. Because fear only lasts as long as people let it. That night, as the stars lit up the sky, I asked myself one final question. If fear knocked on your door, dressed as power, threatening your family and your home, would you bow down to it, or would you rise up and take your street back?